You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Extraordinary scenes in the White House as President Trump and President Zelenskyy row publicly about the future of Ukraine. In an angry dressing down, Volodymyr Zelenskyy was told to show gratitude. Donald Trump saying, make a deal with Russia or we're out.
Your country's in big trouble.
Wait a
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President.
President Zelenskyy was asked to leave the White House soon after, and a planned news conference was cancelled. We'll have reaction live tonight from Washington, Kyiv and Moscow. Numerous European leaders have come out tonight in support of Ukraine. We'll ask what happens now with Jeremy Bowen and Chris Mason.
Tonight, the Prime Minister, Jane, has spoken to both President Trump and President Zelenskyy.
And at the end of an unprecedented day in Washington, D.C., we'll be asking what it means for the war in Ukraine.
On BBC London, is it the end of the road for vehicles on Oxford Street? Londoners are asked to have their say on revamping the area.
Hello, good evening. In unprecedented scenes in the Oval Office, President Trump gave President Zelenskyy a public dressing down this evening as the men met to discuss the war in Ukraine. In an extraordinary 10-minute exchange with the room full of journalists, Donald Trump told his Ukrainian counterpart he should be grateful for the help America had given his country and accused him of gambling with World War III. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, was the first to raise his voice. Opposition Democrats have accused him of doing Vladimir Putin's dirty work. A planned press conference was cancelled and President Zelenskyy was asked to leave the White House. In the hours since, numerous European leaders have come out in support of Ukraine and its leader. Tonight, we'll be live with reaction from Kyiv and Moscow and hear from our political editor, Chris Mason. We start by bringing you much of that extraordinary meeting at the White House. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, has the story.
Donald Trump began the day confident he was about to sign a very advantageous deal with Ukraine. These kind of events are all very carefully planned, and they usually do stick to the script. You sit down in the Oval Office with all of the accompanying press, where the conversation starts with pleasantries, sometimes even a little joke.
And I do like your clothing, by the way.
Yeah, really?
There are obvious tensions. President Zelenskyy wants security guarantees for America that Donald Trump says are not on offer. But it was a jibe from a reporter about Mr. Zelenskyy's outfit that actually set the aggressive tone.
Why don't you wear a suit? You're at the highest. Why don't you wear a suit? You're at the highest level in this country's office, and you refuse to wear a suit. Just want to see if you do you own a suit?
Yeah, problems.
A lot of Americans have problems with you not respecting the dignity of this office.
I will wear a costume after this war will finish.
Okay.
Yes.
He was accused of being disrespectful in his dress and in his attitude, for refusing to agree to what Donald Trump thinks a peace deal in Ukraine should look like, for explaining his fears for his country.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all,
This is the moment a disagreement became a full-blown fight. Donald Trump is clearly furious, and you'll see the two leaders start angrily talking over each other, fingers pointing, tempers fraying.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
President Zelenskyy has just been told he cannot dictate the terms of any peace and is gambling with the future of his country. And then, that he's also ungrateful for American military assistance so far. And then, that he's also ungrateful for American military assistance so far.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No, you've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't been
in this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have our military equipment, if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of
accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I wanted this. Look. If you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
They obviously cannot agree on a ceasefire like this. With Donald Trump as angry as he has ever appeared in public, Volodymyr Zelenskyy refusing to back down, enraging the American president even further. They may never agree on whether Vladimir Putin can be trusted to stick to the terms of any deal.
She's asking, what if Russia breaks the ceasefire?
What if anything? What if a bomb drops on your head right now? Okay? What if they broke it? I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt. I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing. All right, I think we've seen enough. What do you think? Huh? This is going to be great television, I will say that.
They were then meant to sit down and enjoy a working lunch before signing a deal that had already been agreed to allow American access to critical mineral mining in Ukraine. Instead, President Zelenskyy was instructed to leave the White House. Donald Trump posted on social media, "I've determined that President Zelenskyy is not ready for peace if America's involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations." He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he's ready for peace. As he got ready to leave, the cameras lined up, ready to catch Mr. Zelenskyy being expelled from the White House. Driving away, he may have blown his one big chance to get Donald Trump on his side. He knows he needs American backing to fight the war. He needs American support to get what he wants in any peace deal. Right now, he's made an enemy of the one man he really needs as an ally. There was meant to have been a joint press conference after a private meeting, where the two leaders would announce what they had agreed, the ways in which they saw eye to eye. But there was absolutely no common understanding. There was absolutely nothing to say. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Washington.
Well, we will have the very latest with Sarah in just a moment. But as we saw there, the Oval Office was full of journalists as that row was going on. One of them was Daniel Wittenberg from the BBC World Service, and he joins me now. And Daniel, just give us a sense of the mood, the atmosphere, the responses from people as they were in that room listening to the men speaking to each other in that way.
Yeah, the Oval Office full of journalists, full of open jaws. No one around me, including seasoned White House correspondents, could believe what was happening in front of us, in front of the world. There were people who had seen a lot of dramatic days, particularly in the Trump White House, but nothing like this, they told me. And Jane, it started off so normal. There were the usual greetings, warm handshakes, President Zelenskyy giving President Trump a gift, a boxing belt belonging to the Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk. But then, as reporters started hurling questions at each of the leaders, the other raised an eyebrow here, had an awkward silence there. The tension was rising, and then it really went up a level, or the gloves came off, like in an Usyk boxing game, when Vice President J.D. Vance chipped into an answer that President Trump had given, and then President Zelenskyy disagreed with them both. Vance was quick to point out that they were litigating an argument in front of the world's media, and none of them were happy about it. And from then on, the frustration just started to boil over, and no one could believe it. And then when we were told to leave the Oval Office, everyone stood still, silent, stunned. No one could believe it, Jane.
Daniel, thank you. Daniel Wittenberg. Let's talk to Sarah as well, as promised. And we think that President Zelenskyy is still in Washington tonight. What's happening there, Sarah?
Yeah, we think he's getting ready to leave to fly to London, where he will be having some more meetings. But I cannot overstate how serious what happened here at the White House earlier today is for him and for the future of the peace process in Ukraine. We know Donald Trump can be loud and brash and bombastic, but he doesn't get angry like this in public. I can't recall ever having seen him so furious, and especially in a meeting which started out really quite civilly, as Daniel was saying there. There are reports tonight that Donald Trump's actually considering ending all ongoing shipments of military aid to Ukraine because of what happened in the Oval Office today. That is how serious this is, because Donald Trump does not like to be disrespected. He does not like to be disagreed with in public. He will be furious with the way Vladimir Zelenskyy acted. And of course, let's not forget, I mean, this row really stems from the fact that these two men do not agree on what a ceasefire deal, what a peace deal in Ukraine should look like. And Donald Trump will not have been persuaded by anything the Ukrainian president had to say today. So if Vladimir Zelenskyy is to get back to the table to talk about this, he'll have to eat a pretty hefty portion of humble pie first. And I would say that when they do resume talks, if they do resume talks, he'll be expected to sign up to a lot of what America wants him to agree to before they'll ever agree to move forward with this.
Sarah, many thanks, Sarah Smith. Well, let's assess the response inside Ukraine itself. Our correspondent James Waterhouse is in the capital, Kyiv. And what have people been saying where you are, James?
Well, Jane, going into these talks, these were high stakes. This wasn't just about a mineral deal for Ukraine. This was about a hope that it might entice America to engage with this country on a deeper level when it comes to military support going forward in a post-war world, even over fears of Russia invading again. But you just needed to look at the expression of Oksana Markarova, Ukraine's ambassador to the US. She was in the Oval Office. And when the wheels started to come off, when you saw President Zelenskyy's defensive body language and you saw this near coordinated shouting assault by the US president and vice president, it became clear that nothing constructive for Ukraine was going to come out of it. It was quite extraordinary and high stakes because, as Sarah was saying there, we are still talking about Ukraine's biggest ally. If you were watching Ukrainian TV, events were reported in quite a measured straight way. They referred to a mineral deal that was expected to be signed, not happening. And from the reaction you see online and from the people you speak to here in the capital, there broadly is an appreciation for President Zelensky holding his ground, because ultimately this is still an existential war, widely seen so. And so for President Zelensky to fold to terms unfavourable by the US, imposed by the US, that wouldn't equate to a ceasefire, then that would amount to a defeat. That really is still the belief, despite everything this country has gone through. We spoke to some people who were simply processing what they saw.
Trump's administration was so arrogant. You know, when you look at Zelensky's face, you understand that discussion behind the closed doors was not so polite, because they are so rude. They don't respect people of Ukraine, and they even don't hide it. And it's incredibly unpleasant to see this reaction from the current American administration. That's my point of view.
I understand our president. Maybe it was not a very diplomatic conversation, but it was very sincere. We're trying to tell about what's going on. Unfortunately, for some reason, President Trump has a bit of a wrong idea.
From the side, looks like they support Russia, and they ignore everything regarding the war in Ukraine, the Russian-Ukrainian war, and they think like, okay, we can trade, we can deal, we can forget it, but we can't.
Now, the majority of European allies, with the exception of Hungary, which is an ally of Russia, they have rallied around President Zelensky. We had a post from Friedrich Merz, the next Chancellor of Germany. He said, we must never confuse the aggressor and victim. We had a similar sentiment from the French President Emmanuel Macron. And we also heard from Ukraine's neighbour, the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, who simply said to Ukraine, you are not alone. It's been interesting seeing President Zelensky individually thank each post in solidarity online. He even still thanked America for its support as he continues to work towards what he calls a just peace. A ceasefire deal, whether it's related to a mineral agreement or otherwise, a ceasefire deal that contains a military assurance in some way from America. Instead, today could have been the moment that America cut Ukraine loose, leaving it with its European allies to try and work out just how they will stand up to Russian aggression in the future. Tonight, Jane, sirens have gone once more. The sirens have wailed, as they do in cities across Ukraine, and Ukraine feels a slightly lonelier country tonight after what we saw in the Oval Office.
James, thank you. James Waterhouse. Let's talk to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, as well. He joins us from Moscow. Any reaction, Steve, from the Kremlin?
Well, so far, President Putin hasn't said anything about what happened in the White House. Then again, President Putin doesn't need to say anything about what happened in the White House. Not right now. He can afford to allow events to play out. I mean, earlier, Donald Trump said this is going to be great television. And you can just imagine Vladimir Putin sitting right there in front of the television set, enjoying the spectacle of his enemy, the leader of the country he invaded 3 years ago, being so publicly rebuked by the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States in front of the world's media. So no comment from Vladimir Putin. We have had comment from Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, who is now deputy head of the Russian Security Council. He, on social media, wrote that after what had happened, he hopes that America will stop military assistance to Ukraine. Of course, that's what the Russians would love to happen. It's been an incredible 2 weeks or so, which turned everything on its head. It began with the Putin-Trump telephone call on February the 12th, the start of US-Russian talks with no concessions coming from Moscow. We had the Munich Security Conference and that open schism between America and Europe, and now the breakdown in relations between the United States and Ukraine. And throughout all of this, there has been no sign that Moscow is ready to make any concessions, ready for compromise, ready to give give back any of the territories it has seized over the last 3 years. And after what we saw in the White House, that will not have changed. Quite the opposite, I think.
Steve, thank you. Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Well, let's get the thoughts of our political editor, Chris Mason, and our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. And Jeremy, still all digesting everything that we witnessed in the Oval Office in the last few hours. Your thoughts about what it means for President Zelensky himself and the war more broadly?
Well, that relationship between Zelensky and Trump was strained in the very... Before he went in there, Trump has told actually repeated lies about Zelensky and about Ukraine and about the war, saying that Russia did not, well, saying that Ukraine started it effectively. So I think at the end of that, clearly the relationship between Ukraine, the Ukrainian government and the White House is in pieces. But there's also a serious looming security crisis between European members of NATO and the Americans, I think, because there's very different views. You've seen that in all those supportive messages that came out. They are saying, well, with Ukraine, we are supporting Ukraine. They see Russia as a threat. Trump, on the other hand, sees Russia as not just somewhere you can do a deal with. It seems to be his priority to do a deal with the Russians above the security of Ukraine and, by extension, the security of Western Europe. He's made big concessions already to the Russians, put massive pressure on the Ukrainians. So you have to say, maybe this wasn't about a mineral deal. This was perhaps, even in the words of one senior source who I've spoken to, this could have been a planned mugging in the Oval Office, because you could see that moment that when Vice President J.D. Vance, if you like, threw a hand grenade into it, it all kicked off from that point. So maybe the intention was to make that rapprochement with Russia easier and smoother by trying to marginalize Zelensky and by implication with Ukraine. And it could be that the Trump perspective on this now is very much there has to be this deal with Moscow. And if the price is forcing Ukraine to eat some humble pie at the very least, take on an agreement they don't want, well, that's the price worth paying.
Chris, and let's assess closer to home. I mean, Jeremy mentioned a huge number of, a lot of support coming out very quickly, really, from a lot of European leaders. You mentioned Keir Starmer at the beginning. Where are we now? Where is the UK government with this now?
Yeah, so we just heard a few minutes ago from Downing Street. They say that the Prime Minister tonight spoke to both President Trump and to President Zelensky. The spokeswoman saying that the Prime Minister retains unwavering support for Ukraine and is doing all he can to find a path to a lasting peace based on sovereignty and security for Ukraine. As you say, there'd been about 20 European leaders throughout the evening publicly backing Ukraine. And there was nothing from Downing Street until just a handful of minutes ago. I think what we're seeing is an attempt by Number 10 to act as something of a bridge, both between Presidents Trump and Zelensky and indeed between Washington and Europe. Some words tonight from the Trade Minister, Douglas Alexander, who was on Radio 4's Any Questions, saying that the scenes were deeply troubling and sobering in the Oval Office, and that it demonstrated in the starkest possible terms, he said, the extent to which the world that we've experienced for the last 80 years has changed, and we're in uncharted waters. What happens next is President Zelensky flies here to London with the Prime Minister chairing this summit of European leaders, including President Zelensky, on Sunday. Speaking to people in government tonight, they knew that meeting was important before today. They now think it takes on a heightened significance.
Chris, thank you. Chris Mason, Jeremy Bowen, thank you both very much at the end of an extraordinary day just outside Washington. In fact, we see tonight this image of Air Force One. It's on the tarmac there, waiting to take President Trump to go to Florida, to go down to his resort at Mar-a-Lago as President Trump begins his weekend at the end of a quite extraordinary day. Let me just tell you as well that a special edition of Ukraine Cast is available. You can download that, of course, from BBC Sounds, reflecting on all the day's events. And if you did want to watch that whole Oval Office exchange, that's available in full on the BBC iPlayer. You'll find it on the news section of the iPlayer. And Nick Watts joins us. He's going to have more on all of this on Newsnight shortly on BBC Two.
Thanks, Jane. Well, the world is reeling after that unprecedented Oval Office bust-up. Tonight, we're joined by the former Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt, a leading Ukrainian MP and President Trump's former ambassador to the EU, to digest this historic day. That's Newsnight in 6 minutes on BBC Two, BBC News and BBC iPlayer.
Thanks, Nick. Nick Watt. Well, Sir Keir Starmer was at the White House only yesterday to discuss Ukraine, having announced an increase in UK defence spending. Today, Annalise Dodds quit as International Development Minister because that increase is being funded by cuts to overseas aid. She said the cuts would take food and healthcare from desperate people and harm the UK's reputation. Her departure is the first resignation over policy from Keir Starmer's government. Here's Vicky Young.
No wonder the Defence Secretary was smiling after this week's Cabinet meeting. He'd just been handed a huge chunk of Annalise Dodds' budget. She then had to sit behind the Prime Minister as he announced to MPs that overseas aid would be slashed by billions to boost defence spending.
That is not an announcement I am happy to make. I'm proud of our pioneering record on overseas development.
He insisted that support for Gaza, Sudan and Ukraine would continue. But in her resignation letter today, Ms Dodds wrote, "It will be impossible to maintain these priorities given the depth of the cut. The effect will be far greater than presented." She added, "These cuts will remove food and healthcare from desperate people, deeply harming the UK's reputation." This visit by the Chancellor to an Air Force base in Lincolnshire was supposed to be about celebrating the rise in defence spending. Instead, she had to respond to the unexpected resignation of a colleague.
It's disappointing to lose a colleague. The world has changed. We can see that all around us in Europe and beyond. We have to uplift what we spend on defence, and we have funded that by reducing the international aid budget. That is the right decision in the circumstances that we face today as a nation.
But some Labour MPs see today's resignation differently.
People are going to die because of these cuts. That's the bottom line. And that was obviously something that she couldn't live with. This decision, it doesn't feel right. It goes against the very core of what we as the Labour Party of this Labour government was elected to do, which was to look out for the interests and the security of this country, but also to look out for the poorest and most vulnerable, both domestically and internationally.
Annalise Dodds is not a politician who relishes rocking the boat, and her criticisms make uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister, suggesting that he hasn't been honest or realistic about the effects of the aid cuts. She also challenges his economic policies, calling for a wider debate in the party about how future rises in defence spending will be funded. There are difficult decisions to come on spending. The Chancellor's promise not to raise taxes again or increase borrowing. Not all of her MPs will agree. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
The Vatican says Pope Francis, who's been in hospital with pneumonia, suffered what it called an isolated breathing crisis this afternoon. The Pope, who's 88, required medical assistance to help him breathe. He was first admitted for treatment in Rome 2 weeks ago after experiencing breathing difficulties for several days. Our correspondent Sarah Rainsford joins me from St Peter's Square. What more is being said, Sarah?
Well, the Vatican are describing this as a crisis, albeit an isolated one. They're saying that essentially the Pope this afternoon had a spasm of the lungs that made him sick. It left him struggling for breath. His lungs were cleared of obstruction and he was given oxygen to help him breathe. And we've been told that he is alert this evening. But certainly I think this is a worrying development again for Catholics, many of whom gathered here this evening at St Peter's Basilica, led by cardinals, in prayers for the health of the Pope. They've been doing that now for 5 evenings, coming here together on the square to say those prayers. I think perhaps many Catholics had been hoping that the Pope was showing some signs of improvement. That's certainly what the Vatican had been saying in recent statements and in briefings to us here in Rome. They'd even talked about him doing some light work and even having a meeting earlier this week with some senior cardinals again. But clearly he is 88, he is frail, and he has now had 2 breathing crises, that word used again, in the past 2 weeks since he's been hospitalised. Doctors now say it'll take them a couple of days to establish whether or not there's been any lasting damage and whether or not there's any significant setback for the Pope, who already, of course, is extremely ill.
Sarah, thank you. Sarah Rainsford in St Peter's Square. Now let's pause and take a look at the weather prospects, shall we? Darren Bett has joined me. Welcome glimmer of sunshine there, Darren.
Yes, it was nice to end meteorological winter with blue skies. And over the next few days, as we head into March, there will be a lot of dry weather around, and many places will stay dry with some sunshine at times. But where we have the clear skies, it's going to be cold again, and there's a risk of some fog too. And we've got the clearer skies across most of England and Wales, so temperatures are falling away quite quickly. But look towards the northwest. We've got this cloud streaming into Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's actually a weakening weather front, but it will bring some rain in here, so it's not going to be as cold here as it was last night. But a widespread frost is likely for England and Wales. Temperatures in the south could be as low as -4 or -5, and there'll be some fog, but in different places this time. The fog is more likely to be across East Anglia, a few patches in the southeast, perhaps Lincolnshire, and up towards the Vale of York. That fog will lift in the morning. And then further north, we've got this band of cloud and increasingly light and patchy rain. That rain just tending to peter out, and it's more a band of cloud that's just trickling down into the far north of England, with some sunshine returning to the north, and for most of England and Wales, another lovely sunny day like today, with light winds, and temperatures widely will reach 10 or 11 Celsius, so pretty mild here. High pressure is going to be dominant really over the weekend. We've got some stronger winds coming in to the north of that. That will bring some cloud into Scotland and Northern Ireland. But there's still a risk of a touch of frost here as we head into Sunday. A frost is more likely across South Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia and Southern England. There won't be as much fog around, and it looks like it's going to be another sunny day. A bit more cloud, a little bit misty for North Wales, Northern England, but some sunshine. And we'll see that breeze bringing in more cloud to Scotland and Northern Ireland. Sheltered eastern areas will see some sunshine. Temperatures 11, 12 degrees, possibly higher in eastern Scotland. Jane.
Darren, thank you very much. And that is the BBC News at 10. You can keep up to date on an extraordinary day on the BBC News channel and on the BBC website, of course. Right now, though, it's time to join our colleagues here on BBC One for the news, wherever you are. From the team here, I wish you a peaceful night. Good night.